Today we're back in Ironbridge at the Jackfield Tile Museum in the small village of Jackfield, just downriver from the Iron Bridge itself. It's a beautiful little part of the world, very scenic, very wild river, and the Jackfield Museum was placed here. There was a lot of tile manufacturing in this area, so we're going to be covering Jackfield, but also other tile manufacturers, Maws and Dunhill. And at the end, we're going to have a little bonus. We're going to the old Maws factory, which sadly now is a craft centre. So there's nothing more than a couple of signs left of Maws. If you think tiles are boring, don't worry. We're going to start with the Gothic revival, the House of Commons, or we'll have to go soon to Fugin's Gem in Cheadle. It's a very beautiful church. And here we're looking at hard-wearing tiles that hold colours for decades or even centuries and are very elaborate and bring a degree of decoration to a building. But we start back here. This is actually Buildwas Abbey, which again we'll be going to in a video very soon on Saturdays. And Buildwas Abbey was a middling-sized abbey just outside of Ironbridge, owned a lot of the land around there, and these are some of the tiles that were there from the Norman and Middle Ages. And then we see some of the other pottery from here, because you had, in this small valley, Jackfield, which is in the village of Jackfield, named after Jack's Field. A man called Jack owned the fields there. You have these huge vases as well. And there's a lot of Moors who are famous for Majolica, and we'll be talking about that a bit more. Sadly, they're gone about 25 years now. There was also Craven Dunhill and Co., who are still actually trading but moved out of Ironbridge to another part of Shropshire. And the museum is a very thorough display of all of these companies. Dunhill is still running there. It's commercial tiling. Very high quality, all of them. Very hard wearing. And they also had brick and roof tile making companies in the area. If you saw our video on Blitz Hill Museum, the Blitz Hill Victorian town has a brick making furnace. Then we move down to the next floor. It has a collection of tiles from all of these companies. Although Moors is long gone now, Dunhill's still around. Jackfield again has closed. But there's a very good collection and display of all of them. And you can see the range and the detail and the quality. And you have all these different types of tiles. You have cast tiles, pressed tiles. You have Majolica, that's where there's raised slip. So it's liquid clay. This is the more medieval style you might see in a cathedral. Rochester has very good tiles there. Then we come in on this beautiful Victorian flooring. You see the floor and walls here. This was the original entrance hall to Jackfield Tile Company. And you can see it's very much of an era. It screams Victoriana. And it's very elaborate, very hard wearing, very sturdy. Up here is a lovely cabinet. It's a sort of radiator cover almost, and loads of beautiful tiles on the wall. All of these are works of art. There's also the mosaic style on the left, and you can see it survived through the Art Deco period. Now here we have, this is a display room that was used for people coming to buy tiles. They could see examples. And they've sort of preserved a fair bit of the feel of that, along with these display cabinets in the middle. There's a good explanation of, this is like the catalogue, so you could come and these were the different types of tile that you could buy for going around the furnaces you were fitting, or for flooring, for walls. there's a perfect example of the tiles at the bottom and the tiles at the side of a fireplace, which any office or home of a certainly middle class, or even I had a friend whose grandparents were foremen, and he was a foreman in a factory, and he had a very similar fireplace to that. You can see how ornate they are. Out the window, you can see a bit of the factory here, but you can also see the River Severn about 200 metres away. So, a very good location for this factory. And this is the Gothic revival, so 1830s. The idea was to bring back almost church architecture of the Middle Ages. And also, with the legalisation of Catholicism, there was a big spurt of new churches being built, and those churches needed decoration, and they'd lost about 300 years of Catholic churches, so they wanted to recall the history of centuries ago whilst also being very modern and up to date, and a Gothic revival was really quite a key to that. That's the stand they had at the 1851 exhibition, which we'll have to do a video about the 1851 exhibition at some point. It was a huge trade show for the world to come and see the best of British engineering, ingenuity, creativity. And here you can see more and more examples of these tiles. Let's face it, in your house today, it might not be quite to your taste. Probably doesn't work if you've got a house built after the 70s. But if you've got a Victorian house, these tiles are exactly what your house is crying out for. Here's a beautiful example of a stove. So it's a stove and heater, and it's got tiles on the top and on the side, beautifully decorated for the time. The stove itself was made by the Coalbrookdale Company, and the tiles were made by Jackfield. And you can see a big evolution in the style from the sort of almost Roman inspired mosaic, the Gothic revival, the Art Deco on the wall there. Here's the office where designers would sit and think of different designs, because they had a huge range. This was almost like Wedgwood or Waterford Crystal. You don't, in the catalogue, have 10 items. You have 10 candlesticks. You have, in their case, 20 or 30 different types of decoration for the floor in front of a stove, 30 or 40 for the sides. And here's actually the office. So this is where the directors sat and made the decisions that kept the business going. It's probably about 1920s where it's up to. And here, art pottery. One of the ways they kept going was with art pottery. As the Gothic revival became boring, art pottery was kind of creative. As a bit of naive art to it. There's a style to it. It's a very particular style. And this room here was the design studio. A lot of that's really gone. But you can see a lot of the different styles that were tried. And people had tiles of all sorts of things, from kids' rooms to kitchens to offices. And here's Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau's always been one of my favourites. I think I've never lived in a house where Art Nouveau was suitable. But here, the Persian and Moorish, a very good set at the V&A Museum. You can see at that, which we're definitely going to have to visit. Probably my favourite museum in London. And you have quite a lot of original Persian and Moorish art on the ground floor to the right and then the left. In the Gothic revival, you see the Lamb of God there, the various types of crucifix and different symmetrical pictures. And then that evolved here into the Reformed Gothic, which are a little bit more simple. And here, these are beautiful. These are sort of carved into the pottery. Again, this was done in this area. Some examples of as a palace in India. where they tiled all of the columns and walls, and Jackfield made those. This corridor has a lot of Shakespearean images, so you have Midsummer Night's Dream, Merry Wives of Windsor, that one. That's King Lear, probably my favourite Shakespeare is here. And Othello was back there. Very beautiful tiled pictures. Not actually sure where they were displayed, but... And here, anyone who's been in, lived in, or visited London will recognise this. And I think this was Dunhill Co. They did the tiles for the underground. So, again, very hard wearing. If you go to, not sure, Covent Garden, if you go to Embankment and you walk between the Bakerloo line and the Northern line, you'll see a corridor just like that with original tiles going back to probably the war. And here's some of the uses of tiles. They had a butcher's there. Obviously, you want to keep the walls very clean. Shops, it was a very convenient way of having a surface you could wipe and it could still look nice. Here's an example of the use in churches. They make a bit of a statement about the church across the road being very beautiful and having a lot of tiles. Kind of does. I think it's a little bit more sad than it was when the museum opened. When I went there, and we'll try and include a little bit at the end of this, one of the windows was broken in the church. It was sort of cold and deserted. Felt a little bit, not unloved. It felt loved, but it felt like there weren't many people to love it. It's sort of stranded in this little village. Again, more and more tiles. And this is Moore and Co. It's Majolica, so you have a raised design and then you pour in or paint in the paints around it. And here, England and Scotland on the fireplace surround. And even cinemas. This is what a cinema looked like in the 1930s. I can't think of any that quite look like that in the UK today. Disney have a cinema on Hollywood Strip, which is very much like that. And you can still go and watch films there. Here's some lovely designs, probably not to my taste. And a bathhouse, so for sanitation it was widely used. This is an era where the Victorians were putting in sewers and pumping stations, and they were temples of engineering, and they wanted them to look beautiful. And you see how gorgeous that is. I'm not sure I'd want it in my house, but form as well as function. There's some examples of flooring. If you go to a nice Victorian house, you might see like that. All different types of glaze and design and style, and really evolved over the years, kept up with fashion. Sometimes a little garish, sometimes a little weird. I've never quite understood the obsession in the 1930s with children's nursery rhyme tiles. Here, these display cabinets in the middle are very good. If you know nothing about tiles and you come here and you go through this, just the centre of this room, you have a much better understanding of how tiles are made, the different types. They also have Minton and Co. here. Minton were a very famous pottery company back in the day. A lot of, I've heard, I hope it's 2 hall. The actual production process, so how the tiles were made this way. So they're pressed, and that gives you a flat tile. Then you biscuit glaze it, which is, or biscuit fire it, which is basically fire it at about 1100, 1300 degrees. Then it's allowed to cool, and then it's decorated. So you put on the decoration, then you put on the glaze which holds that in place. Then you glaze fire it or ghost fire it at about 1,000 degrees, a little bit cooler, and that melts the glaze in so that it forms a single surface. And then sometimes they were painted on top of that. That's the overarching process, but there were different approaches as well, like Majolica, where Majolica is normally pressed as a 3D design, or it's the slip, which is liquid clay or semi-liquid clay. It's kind of poured, think like icing a cake to create the design, and that creates pools that you can then put colour within. And then here's examples of the designs, the mould designs. You effectively have the mould as a reverse. Think of a jelly mould. And here's some of the tiles that would be made from it. Without decoration, they look very plain and a little rough. But really, it's the decoration and the glaze that brings out the design and the texture. And then there's one last room here at the Tile Museum with some really beautiful examples of tiles from different periods. And this is John Scott's collection, I believe. This is some of his favourites. I loved it. Doesn't really come out in the video, but I loved the peacock there. And some of these are quite three-dimensional. Some are very flat. Some of them are textured. Some of them have different levels of glaze. So it's not as simple as putting a sticker on, which it does. Some do get made that way. They're effectively flat with a sticker on top. Some are hand painted. Some are glazed, but painted with the glaze. And here's some great examples of Gothic. Certainly, if you like anything from sort of 1800 to 1930, there'll be a lot of pieces of art here which you like, because these were tiles. They were form and function. They were very useful. They were very hard wearing, and they held the colour for a very long time, not like painting or wallpaper. But at the same time, they were works of art. It really was form and function. Hopefully you've enjoyed our visit to the Jackfield Museum in Ironbridge. I'd say if you get the pass, it's free when you're visiting the others, and it's well worth visiting. If you're coming to just this, you probably want to come to a few. Now, we did pop to that church opposite, but I really couldn't get any video that was useful. It's a couple of broken windows, quite dark and dingy, but a beautiful old church. Just to finish off the video, I hope you enjoyed Jackfield Tile Museum. We've come to Maws and Co. Maws and Co were a manufacturer of Majolica ware, particularly. So they're famous for their Majolica tiles. And there is a set round the corner which isn't Maws, but it's in the car park. It harkens back to Maws. Maws were pretty well known, very good quality, beautiful pottery, but unfortunately there just isn't a market to pay the price for these products. So today it's a craft centre with a mixture of upholstery and healthcare and clothing, pottery, all sorts of wares. The one I particularly enjoyed at the end here was a workshop which you can't technically visit but has display cabinets of science fiction models. So, beautiful site, beautiful pottery, free parking, but unfortunately completely forgotten to time Maws. So do subscribe. We're going to be visiting a series of museums around Ironbridge, and they'll be on the Monday museums, and also some of the unbound histories in coming months are going to cover the Industrial Revolution, which really kick-started in Ironbridge.